Welcome to the best fantasy basketball podcast on the internet. I'm your host, Kenyon Browning, and this week on the show, we've made a few changes. New name, new logo design, and we rewrote the entire approach to the show. All right, guys, I know it's a lot of change, but here's what you can expect going forward. So instead of one long podcast every week, we're going to do 4 shorter episodes. Each episode is going to be 20 to 30 minutes in length. So hopefully it fits into your drive to work or your drive home from work, or maybe if you just take a really long dump. Each episode is going to follow the same theme. So if you have some content that you like, you can just listen to that episode every week. And if you feel like broadening it out, great. The first episode each week is going to focus on setting your lineup. We're going to dive into that 8 through 13 spot on your roster. We're going to try to find gems that you should be starting every week. We're also going to try to find duds that really should be riding the bench. This episode is going to be focused solely on player performance discussion. So if that's not your jam, that's okay. Skip it. There's plenty more content coming throughout the week. However, if you find yourself struggling with setting your lineup every week and you want some pointers, listen in on Mondays or Tuesdays, and we'll offer you our best advice on how to get value or how to avoid tragedy when you set your lineup on Mondays. The second episode is going to be a top 10. As we talked about it, all 3 of us love ranking things. We also like arguing with each other. So we're going to put together our best top 10 of whatever the topic is, and then we're going to discuss our rankings live on the podcast. If you like listening to us trash talk each other, argue, or if you really just like the banter, this is a great episode to catch every week. We're going to post it on Wednesdays or Thursdays. And each week, we're just going to take a top 10 of really whatever we feel like. The third episode each week is really intended to be more educational. We're going to be focusing more on concepts than players in this episode. And we'll pick topics that help you become better owners and better fantasy managers overall. One week, we may cover how to sell high on a trade without pissing off all the other owners, or how to evaluate your rookies in a dynasty league as opposed to a redraft league. If you're looking to learn more about fantasy basketball, about how to play it, and how to evaluate players, but you really don't want to listen to us talk about individual players or individual performance, this might be a good episode to check out. We're looking to release probably on a Friday or a Saturday. Might be good weekend content while you're, I don't know what you guys do on the weekend, but whatever you do. The last episode each week is really going to be focused on waiver wire pickups. The plan is that we release this episode on Saturday or Sunday. And hopefully this coincides nicely with the new waiver wire rules that I've set up. So for those of you who don't monitor the league announcements channel, I've moved up to only 2 waiver clearance times during the week. The first waiver clearance time is going to be on Sundays at 3 p.m. Central. The idea here is that you get the whole week to put your bids in, look over the players list, review different players and see how their performance is changing. And then on Sunday at 3 p.m., you find out if you got the guy you bid on. If you didn't and you have somebody injured you want to drop or somebody that you want to replace on your roster, that's okay. Monday, there's another window at 3 p.m. where you can make sure you get a new player before roster's locked for the week. Again, if you're stressing over who to pick up, tune in on Sunday and we'll give you our best waiver wire finds to round out your dynasty roster. And that's it for now. Guys, we know there's been a lot of change. We hope these changes make the content we're making more accessible and more helpful. If not, we'll continue to adapt. One last thing before we start the episode. Please remember this podcast is for you. Give us your feedback on what's working and what isn't. Leave a comment, message me on Instagram, or just drop me a text. My door is literally always open. All right, that's really it. Now let's get into it. Welcome to the best fantasy basketball podcast in the world that there has ever been and ever will be. My name is Kenyon Browning. These are my hosts, David Haker and Josh Browning. How are you guys doing today?
What's up, y'all? Glad to be here. Glad to be a part of the best ever and the best that ever will be.
Yeah, I believe in that. I love that. I think that's the best way to start the podcast, and we'll be starting it that way from now on. So I thank you, which one of you came up with that? I actually don't remember who it was. Oh, Josh. Of course. Want to give, David's going to take credit for every single thing that he can throughout the history of this podcast. So
if it was good, I did it.
I'm on board with that. All right. So here's episode 1 for the week. We're going to talk about setting your lineup today. And we're really going to focus in on 2 categories. One, as an overall kind of mechanism for this episode, we're going to be talking about bubble guys. So we're not going to be talking about your Damian Lillards, your Bradley Beals, your Steph Currys. These are going to be guys at that 8 to like 13th spot on your roster when you have a full slate in the week and you're trying to decide who to start and who to sit. We're going to give you some tips and some pointers on guys that should be in your lineup, whether it be because of injuries on the team, moves in personnel, or recent play that's just got us really hyped. We'll also talk about some guys that should not be in your lineup. So these are guys that have either had their minutes trail off recently, or as Josh will cover, maybe some hot takes with regard to guys that might be intentionally sitting frequently in the near future. So I guess to start out with, I think
this a segment where we talk about Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yes, I think you're on the wrong.
I heard Bubble Boy.
That's next week, dude. That's next
dude.
Week.
You're on the wrong
podcast.
That's a different podcast. Dave.
That's on classic movies that should be burned with fire.
I heard Bubble Boys, and I instantly thought Jake Gyllenhaal. But let's talk about Bubble Boys.
Who didn't? All right. Well, so I say, what do you guys want to start with? We can start with the guys that should be in your lineup or the guys that shouldn't be in your lineup. It's your guys' call.
Start with the guys who should.
Yeah, that's what everybody wants to know. Week's coming up.
So for you guys, who is who? Give me one of your like should be in your lineup guys.
I'll go ahead and start. So I've been watching the Cleveland Cavaliers pretty heavily. I've been wanting to get an eye on the new potential rookie of the year that they drafted. But I've also noticed that Lauri Markanen has been playing pretty well. He's kind of one of those guys that, at least for me, has always been on the cusp of, do I keep this guy on my team? Do I wait till he has a hot streak and try and trade him off because I hate him? Or what? And with his move to Cleveland, I expected him to actually kind of have a regression because they're kind of stacked with big men there. But he's actually played really well, and he's exceeded my expectations. He's averaging, I think, like around 30 points a game. So he's one of those guys that I definitely make sure I'm starting this guy if it comes down to a day where I have to make a choice between some players.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. The big lineup they're running, I mean, leaving aside what he was out recently with like COVID or an injury of some kind. I don't remember what it was, but outside of that, I think he's averaging something like 30 fantasy points per game over the last 7 to 14 days. And he looks good too. He's able to expand his role in the team. I know in Chicago, obviously they're stacked with talent. And last year he couldn't really get a lot of minutes, but he's playing like 30 plus minutes a game. I like watching him play. They're big.
Yeah, he started out real hot as a rookie and kind of had a regression in his second or third year. And I expected that to continue, but he's kind of ramped back up. And like you said, he's been averaging about 30 points a game. He's actually averaging 34 over the last 2 weeks. So he's really starting to kick it into gear and approaching that like kind of top 50 level tier level.
I like it.
Top 50 player tier level.
I'm all about him. I'm always hesitant to recommend anybody on Clay's team, but you know, every once in a while. What about you, Josh? Anybody on your radar?
As far as, I think for starting, I was kind of looking at everybody's lineups and really, I mean, I don't know how Kara has gotten so lucky with a couple of these people, but Devin Vassell is one of those ones for her, Kara, if you're listening, and everybody. I feel like Devin Vassell has not only been playing outside of his mind lately, but I think he's just going to get better with Pop basically playing all of the young guys on his team, and DeJounte, I mean, playing like a beast. I know Dad has him at, he's averaging like what, 40 plus points. And then Keldon's on that team. There are just a bunch of guys that play really well together. And Devin has been a really big piece of that team lately. He's been able to get rebounds because he's so lengthy. He's been shooting really well from outside. And he's already just like a great defender. So he's going to get you steals. He's going to get you some blocks too. So
I feel like he's Sorry. Go ahead, Kenny.
No, you're good. Go, bro.
I was going to say he reminds me a lot of Mikhail Bridges on the Suns. He's a real long, lanky, probably going to be a 3-and-D specialist. And Mikhail Bridges right now, I think he's in his like 5th year or something, just signed a long, big contract for like $100 million or whatever. So he's valued around the league. But he gets a ton of 3-point shots. He gets rebounds. He's a great defender. But the caveat on Devin Vassell that I'd say is he also has a very good mid-range game. So I think in my mind, he kind of fits the mold of a Mikhail Bridges, but possibly could be a little bit better than him in a few years, which would put him up in like the upper 50 players of the entire NBA league in terms of fantasy. So I'm kind of upset Kara picked this guy up instead of me.
Yeah, and honestly, what's a weird thing is, so for people that are going on here, if you're using Fantrax, as far as the app or any other of the fantasy basketball apps that you can do, most of the time, if you're going and you're deciding like who to start, who to sit, you're basically just going to their fantasy point projected or fantasy points that they have had per game, and then looking potentially at the number of games that they're doing during the period. I'd say that like right now, Devin Vassell is at 26.62 points per game fantasy wise, which isn't fantastic. But if you actually go into his player card, you look at his averaging on the minimum 33, and that's it on average. He only had 2 games where he only scored 9 and 14, and that's what brought him down. The rest of all his scores are in the high 30s. So he's actually one of those people that when you just go into your players and you're just comparing those fantasy points per game, you need to actually go into the card, because it's going to you could compare him to, I don't know, like who's another person who's averaging 26.6 points per game?
Mikhail Bridges.
But let's look at Mikhail Bridges. So Bridges,
I don't actually know what he's averaging. He's on my team.
It's about 27 point.
There you go. I knew it.
27.9. But if you look at he's actually more like 23, 25. He had a 45-point game. And then he went 10, 21, 29, 25. So honestly, like if you're going to choose between the two, even though Mikhail Bridges has a higher points per game, like fantasy points per game, honestly, Devin Vassell lately has been averaging like within the last 3 games, 30 plus points a game. So lately he's actually the much higher. And as far as strategies and looking for those of you who are still learning about like Kara, if you're listening, or anybody else listening, like that might be a good strategy to take with Devin Vassell and other players on your lineup.
I'm always going to be a fan of anybody who takes minutes away from Derek White. So that's all I can say.
Oh man, what's all this heat against my team? Calling out Mikhail Bridges? Devin Vassell's better than Mikhail Bridges? I don't think so. Having said that, I might look into a trade, Kara, if you're interested. And
once again, it only took what is it, like 30 seconds or
I was going to say
into the podcast?
It took 9 minutes and 11 seconds for David to use the podcast as propaganda.
Hey guys, that was in no way propaganda, but also Derek White, who's on my team. This guy is playing at a top 50 level. So any of y'all that are interested, hit me up.
Yeah.
He's a little too old for my team, but if he wasn't too old, then
you'd definitely be keeping
this guy. Yeah, exactly.
We know. We are all buying it, David. Wink, wink.
On Josh's point, though, you can also narrow down the fantasy points per game by 7 days back, by 14 days back, by 30 days back. And if you do that with Devin Vassell, over the whole season, he's averaging a little under 27. If you narrow that down to the last 2 weeks, he's averaging almost 30. And the last 1 week, he's averaging 35. So he's ramping up. Of course, you can't expect that to last forever. But as the season progresses, he's sort of finding his role within the Spurs, and he's performing better and better. So expect him to kind of keep this upper level trajectory throughout the season. It's pretty common for some rookies to have a significant improvement from the rookie to the sophomore year. So
I agree. And I'm happy to recommend Devin. I think Devin's been a great player. I think we had 2 other guys on our list here for start. And I think reasonable that we speed through them and then hit the guys who should be sitting. Quite frankly, I kind of cheated and put a guy on here that probably, frankly, isn't going to be a guy you're going to be making a lot of decisions on, but really kind of want to just call out some of the performance he's had lately. So Kristaps Porzingis plays for Dallas. He's their center.
Who?
I don't keep track of Dallas players. They're
realistically, he's probably not a guy that you're legitimately going to ever sit. I would say there were points last season where that was absolutely the case or was absolutely possible. But yeah, I mean, he's really playing good. I mean, I'll put this out there that I think, injuries had a lot to do with that. I think he was maybe not at the top form, at his top form from a health perspective. He looked injured all last season. And I think he's finally recapturing some of the glory of those New York days. Now, granted, Luka being out, I'm certain plays a role in that, but we can we don't have to spend too much time on Kristaps.
He's 26 and he's already looking back at his glory days.
Well, when you're 7'5", maybe the body doesn't age as everybody else's does. The other guy I wanted to talk about a little bit was Carmelo, and I kind of want to hear what you guys' thoughts are here. Personally, I've never been a fan of Carmelo, to be totally honest, but this old man Carmelo, I'm actually starting to really like it. Like he's finally found a niche on a team where he can actually contribute to winning instead of like tanking an entire New York Knicks franchise for a decade. Hey
man, second round of the playoffs is nothing to scoff at.
I can scoff at that and actively will. But I really love this role he's found as this like sharp shooting, like, I don't know, I guess you could call him like a Kyle Korver type or a JJ Redick type. I like that he probably offers the same thing those guys offered for years, but in a bigger body that can kind of defend every once in a while if he decides to. And he can take guys off the dribble if he needs to.
Don't be deceived, Kenyon. This man does not defend.
I think that's more of an effort issue than it is a skill issue. But yes, I agree.
And if it's effort versus skill, then James Harden is Defensive Player of the Year. Or at least he could be.
That's a statement that I do not ever want to be said on our podcast ever again. So if you could hold that.
2.5 steals a game, man.
Hey man, if the winners of the game, if the person who got Defensive Player of the Year got like strippers and luggage, then he would be
that's true.
From the end of now until the end of his career, who would be defensive NBA first team.
That's probably fair.
So back to Carmelo, I'm not so sure. He's kind of on the cusp for me. For one, I don't know about after his last 3 or 4 games, but leading up until those, he was shooting by far a career best from three-point range. Not even close, 10, 15 percentage points higher than he ever had previously in his career, which usually indicates, especially for a 19th year player, that is unsustainable. He's still kind of maintained a mid-20s per game role though. So he's kind of now in that groove where he's kind of like an average fantasy player, someone that could maybe go on and off of the waiver wire all season based on his hot and cold streaks. So I don't really have a good answer here on whether I'd absolutely start him or sit him. I think I'd look at who else is injured on the Lakers at any given time. And if there are a lot of injuries, then Carmelo's going to have a bigger role. And maybe in that case, I do play Carmelo over someone else on my team. But if it's going to be an entirely healthy lineup and they're playing someone that you imagine they're going to blow out, maybe don't play the guy.
You can always count on David to bring reason and logic to the party and just ruin all my fun.
Yeah.
I mean, to that point of I hate to side with David.
I thought you were just going to say I hate David.
I mean that too, but I hate to side with David on this too. But and I don't necessarily. I'm probably like the guy who's in the middle of both of you. I think one of the things is Canyon.
Come on over, get in the middle.
We're gonna do a little fantasy basketball sandwich. You can cut that out, right? Great. Okay. Cannon, I think one of the reasons that you have such a high opinion of him, because if you go and look at his stats, yeah, they're good, but I think there's a couple things. His name is Carmelo Anthony. Everyone wants him to be good. They literally, fans willed him out of forced retirement back onto Portland Trailblazers, and then now he's got a rejuvenation. He's not doing fantastic, but what he is doing in fantasy, might add, for his team, however, for a kind of lackluster LA Lakers team, he's doing great. He's being who they need to be. Whereas like a guy on their team like Russell Westbrook is kind of like, he hasn't really found his stride on the team. I think what you're seeing is mostly like when you're watching these games, Carmelo looks really like he's doing really well in his role. Whereas fantasy basketball, I mean, he's doing good. He's putting up good numbers, but I would still say like, make the comparison, do a little bit more analysis before you start him.
Yeah, you guys really ruined all the fun I was having rooting for Carmelo. I just want you to know that.
I mean, if we do the same thing that I mentioned to do with Devin Vassell, where you can look at 30 days back, 14-7, you'll see a significant decrease in Carmelo's production, meaning he started the season out very hot. And he's since cooled off and he's going down. But
we're just going to ignore that, David. We're just going to ignore that and believe in Carmelo.
I mean, traditionally, he's a hot, cold player, so he's going to get hot again. So maybe you try and track that, and then you start playing him at that point. So,
the good thing is Fantrax actually has like a thing that like on each of the players that you can look at their splits. Like, do they play better at home? Do they play better at night games and ways? And so like, I don't mean to be like a Fantrax but just for people
what Josh finish
like that. I don't know, groupie or whatever, a Fantrax groupie. Yeah. Like, oh, it's so good.
Here we go. Josh wants to be in the middle of some Fantrax guys now.
I'm just saying that if you are like iffy on Carmelo and you want to do some more like big brain strategy stuff, maybe one of the things is you actually go and do your own, like see your own patterns on Carmelo and see like, hey, maybe he's not doing so well right now. Why is that? Is it because somebody's injured? Is it because somebody isn't injured? Is it because he's been playing mostly away games? And so I'll leave it.
He does have a significant increase in fantasy points per game when he plays at home versus away.
Oh, look at that. You were making.
Listen.
All
right, you said big brain, and I instantly thought, okay, Josh doesn't have one of those. So what's he talking about?
All right, I'm shutting this conversation down. We've talked enough about the great Carmelo Anthony. We've tarnished his legacy enough for one podcast.
Maybe he'll subscribe.
Okay, so I think the next group of guys we need to hit are kind of your sit, right? These are your guys that have either been playing worse recently, or there's somebody coming back from injury who's going to steal minutes, or somebody we just don't like as much as the performance has shown, and that we're expecting a regression. I guess I'll start out really quickly and hit kind of a pair of guys that we named here as we were doing kind of our pre-pod meeting. That's Otto Porter and Nemanja Bjelica. I don't think we need to talk about them too much. They're both on the same team in our league. They're both on the same team in the NBA on the Golden State Warriors. I think, quite frankly, they play on a team with a large rotation, a lot of players. They're good players, but they're frankly not going to get more than 15 minutes a game, it looks like, for the rest of the season. And it's just, I think it's going to be difficult for them to get much in terms of fantasy production at 15 minutes a game, not being a focal point of the offense and not being like a specialist for threes or for steals or something, some high value category. So I think that's one for me. I'd say stay away from. Josh has a bit of a hot take in this arena. Josh, please share with the world your thoughts of who you think should be on the bench.
Kenny, you're ruining the magic of podcasts. You don't know what my hot take is. That's what makes it a hot take.
Josh, do you have a hot take?
I do, David. In fact, and let me tell you what it is, and we'll just have animations go right over.
Hot take.
All right. So my hot take is LeBron James. So Cameron, yeah. Whoa, who would sit LeBron James? Nobody.
Are you high?
And only A little bit. No. It's like that was.
It's not legal. Well, they don't know where we're broadcasting from, so it could be legal here.
I'm
We're
near
basically in Mexico right now, so
yeah.
Everything's legal in Mexico.
Actually, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, never mind. No, LeBron James. So Cameron, what I'm not saying is don't just sit LeBron James because he is still LeBron James. But if it's one of those situations, the thing with LeBron right now is the same thing of I would argue the same thing as like a Carmelo Anthony or some of the other people that we've been talking about is he's got that name recognition, and so you look at a guy like Kyle Kuzma, who in the media and in real life, no person.
You're talking Kuz?
Little Kuz, yeah. That's my, yeah. Like Kuzma is never a guy that you would ever start over LeBron James in real life. That's just not going to happen, at least not right now in his career. But in fantasy right now, if you look into LeBron's stats, he actually, because he's been hurt a little bit lately, now you can argue that like maybe he is back, maybe he's going to be healthy for the rest of the season. I don't. My hot take is basically I think he wasn't hurt back then and he's going to be hurt later in the season multiple times. And you can't ever really tell that. So if you come to a night where they're playing like some team where you're like, oh man, they got a terrible defense. Or like they're playing Minnesota.
OKC, the team that they go to double overtime against every single time they play them.
Yeah,
garbage.
Where they're just like, oh man, dude, LeBron's going to get he got like 50 the last time he played them.
He's injured.
Or you could play Kuzma, who's just going to be playing some run-of-the-mill team. I would look into that, and I would. I'm not saying that I have any great advice on how to differentiate, other than maybe if he's questionable, if LeBron is questionable, that he might not, and then just go do some Googling if Fantrax or ESPN or any of the fantasy sports apps that you're using doesn't have the information. Just make sure that he actually is playing, because I feel like he's going to be questionable a lot this year. So
I think it's fair.
Let's not limit ourselves to Google. Let's also look into Bing. Let's be searching there as well.
Yeah, this is we want to make sure we want to make sure we're an inclusive podcast where we include all the search engines. We wouldn't want anybody to get offended.
This is good.
Exactly.
So hey, Billy Gates. Look out for us.
He's actually no longer part of Microsoft.
Yeah, that's Satya Nadella. But so
that's neither here nor there.
I get I think the point is a good one, which is that, look, my perspective on LeBron is he is likely to sit a lot of games because they are not winning any playoff games as they are currently constructed. And if those guys don't learn to play together without him saving their buns every game, they're in trouble. So I think it's a well-made point.
But he's chasing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's record, and he has to play to be able to get the most points ever in league history. So
not true.
But at what point does he decide to?
I think
give up on the team and just go for his stats?
If he could literally he could be the first player to play into his 50s. You don't know with medical science. And what he just does is he just goes on a team, plays every other week. Man, he
freezes himself after every game. So he's really only aged about 10 days in the last.
I mean, it's all that Taco Tuesday, man.
How did we get on to Taco Tuesday?
I think if you
LeBron James thing.
Okay. I'll put an end to the LeBron conversation. I think the point we're trying to make is if LeBron is playing, play him, because he's going to get 27-7 like he has his entire career. But make sure that LeBron is playing before you put him in your lineup.
If you're going to do the thing where you set your lineup a week in advance,
do
a little bit of research ahead of time.
Maybe make sure LeBron is intending to play that week.
That's not at all what I was saying. What I was saying is sit LeBron James and play Marquise Morris, because obviously that guy can take a hit.
Yeah,
Marquise Morris. Now that is a man's man. Let me tell you,
right?
Only a man's man will hit a guy and then turn his back like he doesn't care.
So we had two other guys we wanted to talk about before the end of the episode. Dave, we got a few minutes left before we got to wrap up.
Sure.
Hit me with your Hit me with your takes on your two guys that you want to see on people's benches.
David's hot takes.
Takes.
Yeah. So one that I actually have some good points for is Thad Young. He's a guy who he recently had a very hot streak. I think he was averaging something around like 35 fantasy points per game, which is great. But the reason he was getting those points is because Jakob Poeltl was out. And as a Spurs fan who watches some of their games, I noticed Thad Young literally never plays if Jakob Poeltl is playing. So Jakob Poeltl came back 2 games ago. Since then, Thad Young has played a combined total over 2 games of 8 minutes. So he's basically total garbage from a fantasy perspective when Jakob Poeltl plays. So if you own Thad Young or you're planning on owning Thad Young, be cognizant of the health of the other players on the Spurs team. And if there are openings at the center power forward position based on health or injuries of other players, then play Thad Young because he's likely to have a great game. But if everyone's healthy on the roster, don't play this guy because Pop will not play him either.
That would be a cool little feature within the app to just basically say, like, if this player doesn't play or this player does play, it notifies you.
Oh, you mean like as if it put like a red flag next to their name, like, you know?
No. It notifies you that like you should play this person. So like if Thad Young's playing tonight, then basically put like, oh yeah, well then I want to like tie that to Jakob Poeltl.
Yeah, I think
it's $1 billion idea, guys, and
you're going to
start executing on that.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I'll see you when I make my first million.
I expect
let me know how it goes.
One third of that $1 billion. I'll give you my details after the pod.
Hey, and once you get that in place, test it out on Thad Young. He's a prime candidate. The other guy that I wanted to mention was THT Talen Horton Tucker. He's on the Lakers. I think he might be on Jared's team.
Yes.
This is a guy who he was injured to start the year. Then he came back and he just played out of his mind. He was averaging something like 40 fantasy points over his first 3 games, taking about 15 to 20 shots per game. And I mean, his usage rate was off the charts. Since then, though, LeBron got healthy again, and came back and started playing, and his usage rate went way down. And since then, he's had a combined total of 20 fantasy points over 3 games, which is garbage. I mean, that's a little under 7 fantasy points per game. So I think this is a guy who you also monitor a lot like Thad Young. If LeBron's sitting out, like Josh was pointing out, and he's doing some maintenance mode time away from the team, then it's very possible that Talen Horton Tucker has a great game because he'll be that third guy behind Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis. But if LeBron's playing and so are those other 2 Lakers stars, then he's probably a guy that you sit in favor of another guy in your team because he just won't have the usage rate.
I think it's a good call out. Well, hopefully we've been helpful, you guys. The best thing that I can encourage you to do is just set your lineup. That's the best thing you can do to score points. So regardless of all the advice you've given you, hit the green button. Oh, and then also the like and subscribe button.
And ring that bell.
And MeUndies. So, all right. Thanks, guys, for listening. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.